Mm-hmm. Ba, 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 ba. Cool. All right. Hey, everyone. Anthony Fantano here, Internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you are doing well, and we are here for an awesome, amazing, fantastic, exclusive, triple interview with each of the members of experimental hip-hop trio Clipping. We have Will Hudson, we have Jonathan Snipes, and of course we have David Diggs as well. How are you guys doing?
Hey, man.
Doing great.
Awesome. Are you ready to talk about the new album live on the internet?
Absolutely.
Good.
Maybe when you're closer to your computer, David, you're a little more audible. It's like you turn into just like echoey, distant room the second you lean back.
How's this?
Still not great.
You know, that was maybe a little too close, but one thing I love about you guys is that you really help each other out. I can tell that there's like a lot of intergroup support right now. So, let me get to my first question. So we had the piece, the reference, the press in the New Yorker. We had Claudia Conway lip syncing to the music on TikTok. And we had, from what I understand, you guys just had your most positive Pitchfork review too. So with all those things considered, is this the most successful Clipping album cycle?
Hard to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, usually we'd be able to tell if we were able to tour, perhaps. I mean, at this point, we'd be like out on the road and hearing what people think in person and seeing how audiences are responding to the new songs. It feels a little weird to do it. I'm sure this is like everyone has been saying this, but it feels weird as hell to release an album now when it really, I mean, making an album always kind of feels like you just like made a thing and you ball it up and you toss it out into a void. But like this one really feels like that when like I still don't, none of us leave our houses really. So like, you know, it's hard to tell what's going on with it.
I feel like day to day we're like busier talking to people about this record, and we're like, and like doing stuff and like making mixes for things. Like I feel like we're being asked to do more things about this record.
Yeah.
Although Pitchfork did once ask us to make like a mix for them right before our second album came out, and then when they trashed it, we said no.
Yeah, I think my exact words were "eat a dick."
So are you telling me if I shit on the next record, you're not going to come on for the interview?
Oh, we'll come on with you.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, at least. Well, I'm going to hold you to your word then.
If you deserve it, I'm sure. Yeah.
So I think I commented to something to the note of this the last time I talked to you guys, which I think was when you had your Sub Pop debut. A long time ago. I think that was the last time we had a conversation. I was kind of surprised or impressed that, considering everything that all of you have going on, you still sort of continue to convene for this really groundbreaking, top-notch experimental hip-hop music group. And, the records continue to stay quality. And now these days, it seems like we're soundtracking more, we're acting more. I know Jonathan just dropped his a new solo record this year too. I mean, how exactly are you guys like doing all this shit? I know you guys aren't music reviewers, but in a really weird way, I feel like you're coming for my spot because I do call myself the busiest music nerd, and you guys are like kind of doing fucking everything. And I wish you'd slow down a little bit, but how is it all happening? Are you all type A personalities sort of like forming like fucking Voltron and just like coming out with these godlike rap records?
David's the busiest answer.
What's up?
I said David's the busiest. I didn't mean to cut you off. You should answer.
Oh no, I mean my answer is that these guys do a ton of heavy lifting, and I just rap on things. But we also, a lot of these songs, you know, we make a ton of music in these like sort of fits and starts, but like it takes so long to get it out. So these songs have been, you know, these songs, most of them could have come out when the last album came out, but we we didn't because we thought we would release them back to back, and then a pandemic happened. So it just has sort of fallen that way. But we do. It's interesting. It takes us a long time to like settle on any given song, but once we do, they come out pretty quickly, so, and then we just keep tweaking things until we can release them.
Yeah, some things are really, really fast, and then some things take years, I mean, like some songs we make in a day, and then like Run for Your Life on Their Exist took months of going out and trying to actually get that idea to work and things like that. So there's like really intense periods of work punctuated by these like long stretches where we like kind of keep chipping away at like certain ideas or something.
And how would you guys say you overcome the fact that you are sort of working on this material through such long stretches of time, but still at the end of all of it, you end up with a really cohesive concept or focus or narrative, especially on the last several projects? Because if you're talking about working on tracks and bits and maybe it sort of works, effectively on something like your self-titled record because, each track kind of works in its own kind of context. But when you're talking about something like the last two LPs or even your previous one, you're telling a story or you're having all of these songs weave together and enforce a vibe, enforce sort of an aesthetic and, kind of like, give the listener sort of a really specific, artistic direction.
Well, I mean, a lot of that, like, I definitely feel like every time we've let the stuff sit for a while and we revisit, it's almost like we need a day of just like, we just like sit and listen to everything and talk about it again and kind of get our heads back together. I mean, I think at this point we've been doing it long enough that and the work is so representative of like who we are as artists too at this point that we can kind of trust that it's going to be okay and just keep working to a certain degree, right? And then like, I mean, to me, making work like this or making film scores or making any of the things I do is really just a game about whether I'm looking at the little picture or the big picture, and I try to like just switch those two hats back and forth. And if you're working on the little picture, it doesn't matter. You're just like, oh, I'm just like programming these cut up drums for 12 hours or something, like, and I'm just doing that. And then later I'll listen to the whole thing and decide if they work or not. And then I'll make like big sweeping changes and then go back and do like fine detail work. And I think that's kind of how we work too.
David, if you could address that sort of directly too, because I mean, a lot of the themes and concepts of these albums also sort of manifest themselves in the stories that you tell on these tracks too.
Yeah, I mean, we're good at the conceptual part of it. I think it kind of that is one of the things about this band has always been sort of setting up the parameters for the band as a whole and then for any given song too, and choosing reference points and then figuring out how to execute those things in a way that still feels like we want the song to feel. So that's kind of the game all the time, I think. And so once we kind of, and I think it's a lot more of a collective process than people would assume, generally speaking, right? People assume like I write raps and these guys make music, but it doesn't really work like that. We talk about, we come up with the concept for a song or for a record more together than that would seem. And then my job in the band is to execute the writing of the lyrics, but like we've already outlined the song basically. It's kind of, it is like not dissimilar to some of the writers' rooms I've worked in where like really the hard part is outlining the thing. And then you just kind of divide up the work of making the specific episode, but once we figure out that it's going to work, I just have to make things sound pretty.
In terms of those reference points, is there anything to you guys, because at least to me from an outsider perspective, this record feels a little more immense in that respect, because you're talking about balancing different shades and reference points within the sort of medium of horror, different frames of reference within hip hop music, and also different frames of reference within noise music too, because you guys are bouncing between power electronics and sort of like, avant-garde, sort of very noisy acoustic music too, and industrial music as well. And it's sort of like each track stylistically has its own sort of musical flavor. And meanwhile, there are like different references, different eras of hip hop and different movie references like going on throughout the record. There's like so many different touchstones. And in a way, it's so impossibly nerdy. I can't not love it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is that.
Yeah.
I guess when we started, I think a lot of the stuff we were doing was about this specific, maybe this regional or historical moment in hip hop or this type of hip hop or this subgenre applied to however we would sort of contribute our experimental music background to that, how we would sort of arrange it with that. And the lyrics just sort of ended up falling into generally being scary stories about bad things happening to people. And so there was almost a natural pull to doing this type of a record anyway. And I think the horror movie, horror literature stuff was popping up just naturally in David's writing, just because rap is referential in a lot of ways. I mean, every rapper is going to reference movies here and there, and that just for David to be playing that game, we just started, I think, doing it more consciously for this record to be like, these are the specific movies we're referencing. When it started, it could have, slipped into, Scarface or Goodfellas or whatever the classic hip hop references are. And then we just started pulling them in the direction of, horror movies specifically for this, I think. Just so it wasn't like it's like adding a new layer necessarily. It's just like it's narrowing what the references that were going to appear anyway are, I think.
And, as far as like the references and the horror elements go, would you guys say there's like a nostalgic component to that too? Because it seems like there's almost like a very specific era of a lot of mainstream, like horror media that is sort of like approached and sort of like, just given a nod to throughout multiple points of the record.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it has to do with our how, exactly how old we are. I mean, we were working on 96 Nev Campbell, before those lines were written, before that third verse that he does in that song, before those were written, I had pitched like a whole list of possible titles for that of different Final Girls, like 78 Jamie Lee Curtis or 80 whatever it is, 82 Heather Langenkamp or whatever your Nightmare on Elm Street came out. It's like a list of those, and we picked 96 Nev Campbell because we all were, we were in junior high or whatever when that came out, and that was sort of much more our era, and that felt more honest than name movies from before we were born. So it did occur to us that we are kind of doing, I mean, in the way that like we still, a lot of our references still do come from like when we fell in love with rap, right? Like Run for Your Life, which we mentioned before, has LeChat on it, and that's Memphis late 90s, early 2000s for us. And so, yeah, we're always going to go a little bit to that era. I think this one has maybe, these last two, I think we've indulged a little in maybe more contemporary influences. Like I think the song The Show from the previous album is like very specifically about things like Saw and Hostel, and which are not necessarily horror films we like, but that seemed like such a particular era of Bush and the war on terror and torture porn that we sort of wanted to make a very intentionally twisted, like flip of that perspective.
I think so much of like our early work when we were first starting was for us, or at least for me, was about having to point in both directions, to like point to a lineage, particularly of hip hop, so that people would believe that we were rappers, right? I mean, there was this tendency to think of us as something other than rap music or like commenting on rap music. So I made this very conscious effort to always make as many rap references as possible, because I wanted to situate us within this continuum of rap music by saying you see this reference I'm making in this song? It's because I think we're doing the same thing. as this. It was like intentional. So now that tendency is kind of baked in, just becomes kind of part of the way my brain goes when we start writing songs. And so when we're talking about movies too, and this one, obviously, we were at times referencing like really specific horror films, but then also trying to situate all of these songs in a continuum of a horror genre. So pointing both backwards and forwards all the time, and trying to pay attention so that when it felt appropriately nerdy, like the song, the rap references meet up with the horror references, you know, in time.
Yeah. To throw one really quickly to Jonathan, because I know he looks very lonely up there. He looks almost stupefied that he hasn't talked in a while. Would you be able to go a little bit into some of the sound design behind this, and maybe even the last record, and how that sort of is referencing back to these classic horror tropes as well? Because there are, you know, pounding drums and bits of bass that sound like they're straight out of a horror movie trailer. There are very classic sounding analog synths that sound like they're, you know, from an old school slasher flick as well. What kind of reference points were you working from when you're picking and sort of designing, you know, helping to design sounds for these past couple of records?
Yeah, it's something we talked about the other day that I had never really put into exactly these terms. Like someone was asking us about concept albums the other day, and there was a trend, at least in like horror movies, a while back. I feel like I saw a number of different directors say that they just wanted to make a movie that felt like it was as cool as the box covers that they remembered from the video store in the 80s, right? That like the boxes would have these like really elaborate paintings, and then the movie would just be this like straight to video garbage, you know? And I realized that that's kind of what we're doing with concept albums. Like I can remember being disappointed, like picking up, I was like, oh my God, there's like monsters and robots and all this cool stuff on this album, and it's going to have this insane plot. And it's like, oh, it's guitar, drums, bass. It's a rock album again. And like, I think that what we're doing, like, I think subconsciously, because I've never thought about it until now, is like trying to make the timbral choices that we're making have as much to do with like the concept as the lyrical choices, right? Because there are these extra referential like associations with timbres and with sound, and with some with music, but some with, you know, with sound as well. And especially like the second that we get into such a specific genre like horror or a science fiction record or something, then we have all kinds of like movie sound design tricks we can play with, or just like sort of an innate feeling of what a world might sound like, and well, and how can that become musical, you know? And how can that, if it's not pitched, how can it become rhythmic? If it's barely pitched, how can it become more pitched? So it becomes like something that Debbie can sing over. Sometimes it's not quite so literal, but sometimes it is really, really literal. I mean, on so many of the sounds in Splendor and Misery were just us trying to use modular synths to make it sound like we thought a spaceship would sound, you know?
And in the case of this, did, I don't know, this involve sort of like secretly grabbing and sampling from places that maybe you can't go into great detail with, or sort of like making these pounding sounds from scratch and then making them gigantic, you know, in sort of like post?
Make all of our sounds from we don't.
Yeah, there's no unlicensed, there's no samples except the ones that are mentioned in the liner notes.
Yeah.
Right. The only samples are
about
Black Santa and Infinite Body, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, and the quote of Mind Playing Tricks on
sample.
the most expensive sample ever, which is just David's voice saying 9 words that Scarface wrote.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
But again, you know, obviously sounds original, as you know, Will just said, but again, sort of like arriving to some of those sounds that we're hearing. I mean, you know, how exactly do you take some sound that you guys are, you know, creating originally and then make it sound as gigantic as some of the stuff that you're presenting here?
Oh, I mean, we've been doing this a while and we just got better at it, I guess. I don't know. And our mixer, Steve Kaplan, is incredibly good. You know, he and I met working in film music, and he has mixed a ton of movie scores and a ton of horror movies. He's mostly an orchestral recordist and mixer, which would make you think that he's probably not the right person to be working on these records. But he's actually, I mean, his ears are so attuned and he's so precise and so specific You know, he's the kind of person that will, you know, spend thousands of dollars and months of his life A/Bing different digital cables or A/Bing different solders and deciding that one kind of solder sounds better when you make a certain cable with it and things. And so he's really, really good at sort of pushing the sounds to their limits spectrum wise. And he'll make us remake things occasionally. Like he made us make the bass sound in work because he was like, guys, it's just not doing what you want it to do.
I didn't get to do it for this album, and it does suffer in some places, I think, because of it vocally. But like, we used to do all of my final recordings at Steve's studio, and not only would that fool make me do 100 takes of a thing, because like he'll catch any little like blip or hiccup in my voice, and also not want to break the continuity of the lyrics. So he doesn't, unless it's absolutely necessary, we're not punching in. So like I'm doing hundreds of takes of these verses, but then also he would do things like come in after a take and move the microphone like half an inch towards my face and then leave again. Like he's just like so precise with how he works, and it's great. I mean, he's brilliant. It is a big part of why our records sound. I think why we are so generally happy with how they sound is because he understands what we're trying to do and has the skill set and the tenacity to execute it.
Moving away from, those obvious timbral references that Jonathan was talking about to horror films and horror soundtracks, if you could go into a specific moment, which I have a few different questions about, because there are some really interesting, sonic shifts and movements on the record. How exactly do we get to a point like at the end of, Say the Name, for example, where we have suddenly moved into, without any warning whatsoever, like this industrial Middle Eastern raga? I don't even know how you would describe it. Like it's the weirdest combination of sounds, and it seems so foreign and so funky and so harsh at the same time, and also so grand with like the way those strings come in. It's like a real clash of aesthetics that on paper shouldn't work, but yet it kind of does. And I don't even know how you would even label it.
I don't remember.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I don't really remember whose idea that was or like how that really came to be. We're pretty good about like just sort of following impulsive ideas too. Like we do a lot of planning and a lot of forethought, but I think we're getting better at just sort of in the moment of making things, say, hey, we planned this much and we've gotten to this point. I just feel like it should go in this insane direction right now. I just kind of have this gut feeling, and then we just try it. And if it doesn't work, we throw it away. And if it does work, we keep it. And that's definitely like, that's how that I feel like is how the end of Say the Name went. I mean, that's also kind of the way that Closer by 9 Inch Nails ends too. And so when we made something that we felt was so particularly indebted to Closer by 9 Inch Nails, I mean, that song has like a 3-minute instrumental outro with sounds you've never heard before. Right.
Yeah.
So I was like,
I mean, that's what I remember. That's what I remember specifically talking about was once we realized that in our first demo of it, the way the kick and the snare hit, we kept jokingly singing Closer over it while David was writing actual words, that we were like, damn, remember how in Downward Spiral, there's all these new melodies that come out at the end of Closer, and they even show up later in the album, and it ties the whole thing up. And it's, if you listen to the single version of Closer, it's like a minute of song and 2 minutes at the end of just like all this stuff without any vocals. And so I think that's one of the things that pushed us, or it gave us the idea that like, oh, we gotta just make this go crazy at the end. Yeah,
and like I don't know. I'm always really satisfied with a song that has not had a chord change until the last 30 seconds or something too, right? That just stays just plowing on this root and this drone, and then you change it, and it's like really cathartic, sort of out of nowhere. So I'm always trying to do that. I guess when I was talking about like that is kind of one of those impulsive moments, I think, of changing the direction of a song. But I'm also thinking particularly of the end of All in Your Head from There Existed, which I feel like Diggs, you and I were here and recording, and they were like, and you said, hey, what if it just changed tempo? And then a woman started singing and we had this totally different end. And then I started writing that and you left and you were like, wow, you've written yourself into a hole here. Good luck.
Yeah. I was like, well, it was also like listening to it. I was like, man, I can't do that. So I don't know who that's for, but it ain't for me.
Yeah, I mean, well, that one kind of needed it because it was that was a really austere, like, first half.
Yeah.
And I had given the assignment to David. I was like, I want you to only write like broken up spondies. So two syllables, so ba 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 ba. The whole verse was only that.
Yeah.
And then we got to 2 verses of that and we were like, cool, sounds great. I don't know if anyone wants to hear a 3rd verse of that shit.
Yeah, that was definitely enough of that.
You know, speaking of kind of the process of creating this and knowing when certain things aren't working, I mean, I kind of go to the track Pain every day, which is one of my favorites on the record. But considering like how many experimental elements are going into that, including the time signature, like I can imagine there being a million terrible versions of that song or something like it or something, or that having to be refined very slowly over a long period of time, maybe in theory. You know, like how exactly do you guys know like a certain experiment isn't working? Because it seems like, again, there's so much focus on the conceptuality of things, but the song never seems to get sacrificed at, you know, the hand of that.
Well, that's
an
an interesting one.
It's not working. It's really hard to tell when Jonathan's going to talk because I can't see. He's not.
Okay.
I'm like, he's clearly not about to say something, so I'll answer this.
Well, he could pop in now if he wants to.
Should I give up on this?
The gag is gone on long enough. There you are.
Well, I was going to say, like, that one particularly miraculously came together. I feel like if an experiment isn't working, we figure it out really, really fast and just chuck the whole thing.
Bail on it.
Whereas
figure out what was good about it and keep that. But.
Yeah, that was like that was one of the faster songs that
of course it is.
Together. Yeah. That one and was the last song we did for the album too. It was the last one we put together because Jonathan is the one who cares about this the most, and he noticed that there wasn't anything in non-4/4 time signature.
The one,
and we were all like, and he was like,
I mean, it's the thing. Like at this point, we haven't really. All of our albums have something. You know, I've at least 1 or 2 tracks that aren't in 4/4.
Sure,
it's true. Well, and Jonathan was really like, we're going to do it. We've never done a song all in 7. Let's do a song all in 7. I was like, sure, yeah, fuck it. And then like I had to write it and it almost broke me. That was actually way harder than I would have thought it would be. I don't know. I did not expect it to be that difficult. Because we've written small chunks in 7 before, but like.
But really what happened too is like, because it was the last song, we just had this list of ideas that were like, well, we can't really call it an album if there isn't one thing that isn't in 4/4. Like there has to be, because every single other record has something. And then we had this pile of these incredible EVP recordings by Michael Esposito that we had not found a place for. So we knew we needed to build a track around those. And then I had in our like pile of ideas, you know, I had this, I had written down just the words breakcore monstrosity that I thought we needed to make just a truly aggressively nothing but breaks, you know, like V snares type thing, that would be a really fun direction for us to go in. And so those just all ended up becoming the same song, you know, like it just became the same idea. Cause we had tried to integrate the EVP recordings into other things, but something about the sonic characteristic of them, because they're so digitally processed and watery and kind of crinkly and garbled sounding, it just didn't fit in any of the sonic landscapes we'd already made. But we thought, I bet we could do this in breakcore. And then there's a plugin that I've become obsessed with. And this is kind of when I first started playing with it, that emulates MP3 compression and just kind of gives you a slider of how bad the compression is. Running everything into that and kind of moving in and out of this really gnarly digital compression full of artifacts just lent itself to being able to then integrate the EVP recordings in it, and the whole thing just kind of came together. Having
and the idea of it being, I mean, the fact that it was in 7, and 7 is so often used in action movies, and like in movies it's a chase scene because it feels like you're tripping over yourself moving forward because you're cutting off that last beat of 8. It's like, so then the using the EVPs and that sort of that idea that this is a chase scene all came together into like what the sort of narrative component of what Paint Every Day was. So it had to be a ghost chasing something.
Yeah, it was a
chasing
ghost.
somebody.
It had to be ghosts, and it had to be a chase. Yeah.
You know, kind of breaching this topic with the EVP recordings. Were there any other, you know, outside sound sources that went into this record that were particularly hard to either work in or capture for the album? Because I know up until this point, you guys have used your own recordings of some pretty eclectic, you know, sound sources over the years.
Yeah, this record doesn't have like a really crazy field recording story in it in the way that there existed had the beats driving by in the car, or like on CLP PNG, we went out into the woods and, you know, played beats out of a car stereo like 200 feet away from mics. And that, like, there were like, we went on all these adventures with the other records that it just worked out that none of the adventures happened on this particular set of songs. There are a handful of field recordings that Christopher Flieger and I did we had this idea of recording dawn choruses at famous murder site, like the sites of famous murders, that didn't really end up turning into anything. Some of those ended up in Secret Piece, and some of those have ended up around the record. But I went out to a site that's actually quite near my house, you know, sort of at like 4 a.m. every week, and recorded the sun coming up, which is just a suburban neighborhood soundscape. And Christopher did a different site, but of course he did it twice as many days with twice as many microphones, and he just left there because he's whatever crazy thing I think we should do, he will do it more.
Yeah. We're referring to Christopher Flieger, who we've worked with a lot, but he's the one who did the live album with us that came out on Record Store Day, where he recorded all of our shows when we were on tour opening for the Flaming Lips, but he recorded them with 24 channels of microphones that he basically hid all over the venues, and, like, you know, putting them in freezers, or, you know, attaching them to the fans or breaker boxes, or tying them to trees outside the venue. And so he was just doing these sort of insane field recordings of all of our shows on that tour. But he did do, so most of the in Secret Piece, right, the instructions for the Yoko Ono piece, Secret Piece, that closes the album are pick a note and play it against the accompaniment of the forest between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. So what I asked him for every recording he has that is, I was so grateful, because what a weird way to phrase it, right? She didn't say play that note in a forest between 5 and 8. She said with the accompaniment of the sounds of the forest during that time. So I was like, oh crap! So Christopher can give me all of his recordings that fit that criteria. So Christopher, who goes on field recording trips with, if you know the experimental composer Francisco Lopez, they go out together to, you know, the Amazon or South Africa or the mountains in Japan. And so Flieger just gave me just gigs and gigs and gigs of dawn in forests on like 5 different continents. So those are the recordings that I ended up cutting to make Secret Piece. So I'm sure there are crazy stories about all those. He would know them, and I don't.
Didn't do those.
It's like, you know, there's probably ones where he's like up to his waist in the Amazon River, you know, with a microphone over his head.
Almost certainly naked.
Yeah.
Almost certainly covered in something.
Yeah.
All right.
Bug spray, I hope.
Before we close things up, I was going to take a handful of fan questions, just stuff people have been dying to ask you guys about. First one comes from 1990 Surge, who wants to know, and I know I asked you guys about this a long time ago, but there were a lot fewer of them, I think, the last time that we had a discussion about this. But can we get any hints to connect all of the story songs? This person wants to know. They want to know the connection.
They're all in the songs. It's all there. Just gotta listen hard enough.
I think
I guess personally I'll ask I know there was a reference to it on the last record. Was there also sort of a tie-in on this new record as well, or these sort of being so close together, was the last one sort of the one that sufficed?
Yeah, we didn't a story song on this one, did we?
Yeah. Well, we didn't do it because we had made the one and we thought we were making one big album.
Yeah.
And then we split it into two and didn't make it. Yeah, I mean, we sort of thought of this as like we already did the story song for this album. I don't know. Now that it took a year for the second half to come out, it feels like maybe we should
have. Those songs are like for me in particular pretty labor intensive. There's a lot of trying to tie threads together, and like a lot of like there's a like stupid matrix with like lines drawn that like looks. It's some like serial killer, like trying to make sure we don't
there's
drop
post-it
the ball.
notes and threads going from thumbtack to thumbtack.
Yeah, so there's not one on this album because I was too tired.
And they get harder, right? Every time we make one, like the new characters that you have to connect.
All right. Dank Daddy 05 wants to know to make things harder for David. And I had my own thoughts on this in the review where I talked about kind of the very cultish elements of this track, but he wants to know explicitly what Make Them Dead is about.
I mean, it's I'm trying to remember in order to like tell you in the right way, like how we came up with that song, like what was the actual impetus for that, but I don't really remember.
Well, that's one that you actually wrote a different set of lyrics for, and we.
Oh yeah.
We made
and then it didn't work. But
that had a whole other rap over it that we threw out.
That's right.
We were supposed to make a new beat for it because we still liked it. We just didn't think that the two things
wasn't right for the thing. Yeah, I mean, it's
sorry.
No. That's why I have like less connection to it than most of the songs, because it's like a kind of a fix. But it is like sort of culty. I mean, it's, the politics of it are about like these sort of like, if there's a thing that is being hunted in that song, it is like right-wing Bible thumping Trump supporters. That's what it is.
I think the idea was because we wanted it to feel like, like a Sutcliffe Bugan song or a White House song or a genocide organ song, but was like our version of that type of power electronics. Those power electronic songs are, often incredibly right wing, but also they're these sort of power fantasies about committing violence and. Right, like I've always thought, like the difference between like harsh noise and power electronics is that harsh noise was always about like, oh my God, I'm here with you and I'm making these horrible sounds and we're punishing each other together and this is what the inside of my heart sounds like. Whereas power electronics was like, I am punishing you, the audience, with the sounds I'm making. Fuck you, right? And so we were trying to make that song.
Yeah, so it was a song about torture and like trying to zero in on kind of when there are lyrics on power electronics songs, they're like sort of calls to, they're like shouting at you, right? Like, so that was kind of the thing. It was like, how do we make what's the clipping version of a power electronics song?
I realized like for me too, that song is really super inspired by Martin Stig Anderson. Like the tonal writing in it is really inspired by Martin Stig Anderson for me, who is the sound designer for Limbo and Inside. And now a bunch of like giant AAA video game titles, but just the way that he did those particular games, he's so good at just creating this hovering, like oppressive blanket of sound that is incredibly musical, but you realize it's actually never changing pitches or chords. So that track is just one held chord the entire time too, which was kind of sort of stealing that feeling from him, but through a lot more distortion. So it felt like power electronics too.
Yeah, because that's what. So we made like that harsh stuff that like lifts during the hooks, so that it becomes. It's like because the harsh stuff is so close up, right? It's like right there. There's no space to it. There's no atmosphere to it, and then it drifts back, and you reveal all the stuff underneath the distortion that we're using, and it becomes this large space, and then it sucks back to the close up, just grinding distortion sound.
And that's the one we made with that tiny little shitty Olympus recorder too. We figured out that little like cheap like voice recorder, if you overdrive the input sound, that one, it's as good as any distortion pedal you could ever want.
Yeah, if you just turn this thing all the way up and run whatever you're doing through it, it sounds gnarly.
So good. Yeah. And it's stereo.
If for everyone who wants to know that. Megatruck wants to know, how would the track lists of these records look if it actually ended up being a double album? Doing 2 records, did that give you guys more room to work with? Was it ultimately sort of a better decision to go with 2 different sort of releases?
I think it was a good decision. We were, we would come up with album orders of songs. Like we did this for both records really, but like there was a lot of back and forth on how to structure these things. Like it was tough. It was not obvious. I feel like I remember like every time we came up with a new album order, I would have to go out to the car and like drive around and listen to the whole record to see if it worked for me. And I did a lot of that for these ones.
Yeah, I haven't done that in years, but I also did a lot of that for this. Like we work in such a way that we usually know exactly, like when honestly, like almost at this point, we write a song and we know where it is in the track order.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about that. Like we definitely, even if we don't have other songs for a project, when we're working on a song, I'm like, oh yeah, this feels like side B, song 1. You know, I already just like have this idea in my mind about how albums work. So like, even if it's the first song we're making for an album, I kind of know where I want it, like what quarter of the album I wanted to be in. And because we took the whole project and split it into 2, it actually made it like just sort of hard for us to get our heads around. And I actually have no idea. A lot of people have asked us on Twitter, like, what is the track listing if we're to listen to both albums as one project? Yeah. Right? As if like, how would we have originally, if we had released a 2-hour long album, which we, thank God we didn't, what would the track listing have been? I have kind of no idea. I mean, I don't know that we.
Yeah. The only thing I know,
I could sort of approximate it, but
the only thing I know is that the intro for Visions has to go where it is. Right? Like it's the only thing that like is. It has to be after, well, not necessarily where it is, but it has to be after you're done with There Existed. So like, if you could, I guess, change the track list on There Existed. But like right now for me, it's split into these 2 parts because kind of the last thing I imagined was writing the second half of a long intro song or intro track.
And that's kind of because all these songs weren't done before we decided to make it 2 albums either. Like we decided to make it 2 albums when we weren't done with the first, with what became There Existed. So we definitely added things and came up with new ideas and did things we wouldn't have done at all if we were trying to make one album. It was like, do we cut 5 of these songs or do we write, 4 more and make a new record or something like that? It was sort of the decision.
I'm going to start telling people that, if they want to hear it in the true order that we intended, they have to listen to Piano Burning first.
Yeah. The other song is backwards, right? Yeah.
Gray Matter 56 wants to know specifically for David, has the Hamilton performances impacted your rap style in any way, in a positive way? Like has it changed your approach, on the records or just in general?
No,
I didn't think so. All right. All right. I'm I'm not sure how to pronounce this guy's name. It's one of those names where it's like all of the vowels are gone, but I'm sorry, but you know who you are. You asked this. With Splendor and Misery going into a sci-fi direction and the last two records going in a horror direction, are there any sort of like thematic, I guess, genres that you guys are contemplating next in terms of like, is there going to be a clipping action album at some point, or
someone asked us if we were going to make a rom-com.
Oh, a rom-com.
Regency romance. That's what I keep saying.
So what now?
Regency romance,
or a period piece.
Yeah, it's gonna be. Yeah, we're gonna just do a straight like Jacobean revenge tragedy.
Yeah.
We've normally the things we joke about for long enough end up coming true, and like we have been joking about a Christmas album for a very long time. So I imagine at some point you'll get one.
For Mid-City, we had ideas for a Christmas album.
Wow. Just thinking of the things that will come up on that. I'm sure the Ghosts of Christmas Past will be in there at some point.
No, don't give them more ideas because they're gonna want to do it. Like
Bill's always the taste police. He's always the one who's like trying to.
David and I would be in the world's worst band.
It would be so bad if Bill wasn't around. Be like, no. There would be no filter.
Yeah, I'm sure there would be a total like reread of Night Before Christmas, but like packed with hip hop references. Like there'd be an E40 reference and a Nas reference, and there would be nothing but like, I don't know, samples of Christmas bulbs breaking like off of a tree, and I don't know, eggnog spilling.
Eggnog spilling is a really funny
spilling. It's really good.
We should do an audiobook of we'll just design the sound for an audiobook of E40 reading "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
I would that is the only thing I want to do now that you've said that.
We'll get E40 to read that out loud, and we'll make an audiobook that's
I'm gonna hit up Earl after this interview. Honestly, we'll do that
anytime. Yeah.
All right. Now that we've kind of for the last question, since a few names have gotten thrown out, and there were some other people asking about this too. I mean, in the immediate or distant future with projects that are coming down the pipe, are there any like kind of dream collaborations that you have in mind, or for you guys, do the ideas of who you want to work with not come up until you have sort of the concept in mind, or sort of like the idea or the direction you want to go in with the album?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people we want to work with, and we could like shout some of those out. But I think it does like the songs with people on them are like really tailored for them. So we wouldn't be able necessarily to do that until we had a song, or at least an idea of a song, But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we do have like ideas for who we want to work with. There is often. I feel like there's a lot of people I think of as like the dream collaborations, but I'm also like, if I weren't in this band, I would be bummed that person collabed with us in some way. Like, I'm just thinking about like Diamanda Galas and how like if she was all of a sudden working with other artists, I'd be like, well, she's not as mysterious and distant anymore. Like I want her to be that unapproachable, but also like how fucking cool would that be to have her on a track?
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be pretty cool.
We are always like really, really specific about our features, and we've made the track for that person. Now, sometimes it doesn't work out. Like we've made tracks for people that we don't end up getting, and either that track just goes away, or we put someone else on it, or David just writes to it. So there are a handful of tracks floating around in the discography that's probably better not to say what they are, but that were intended for very specific people, and then it didn't happen for whatever reason, and something else happened, and then we restructured it around whatever did happen.
We never got our Andre 3000 feature, but we tried as hard as we could.
I did not get that.
And the song came out really good anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the record, Tony Kewell, the vice president of Sub Pop Records, just texted me that he wants us to make a fantasy album from the perspective of a unicorn on a quest with a drunk gnome. So that's our labels pitch for our next album.
Where is Tony drinking right now, and can I come?
Honestly, my advice, call the bluff. Like we want We want triple album. We want the Supreme Loser edition with the splatter vinyl, please. And just make it snappy.
Holographic cover. We need every bell and whistle.
Yeah. Tony, you gotta up them album budgets because we're gonna have to.
Yeah.
This one's gonna be expensive.
So, I lied. One more question. I think it's an obvious one. This one I've gotten multiple times, and I think it makes sense within the context of the conversation and the two albums. If you guys want to, just as a bit of fan service here, throw out just some favorite horror films that people could go out and just check out after this interview, that they could keep their Halloween spooky while they're inside because nobody's trick-or-treating. So if you can come up with a couple horror films that you're crazy about.
I've got my answer is just because everyone's been watching this this Haunting of Bly Manor thing, which I can't even get past how mad I am at the adaptation elements that I'm not even sure if it's good or not. I'm just so furious. Everyone should watch The Innocents with Deborah Kerr, which is a fucking incredible adaptation of Turn of the Screw. That's the best horror movie adaptation of Turn of the Screw,
and sound effects and sound effects by Daphne Oram in The Innocent. That's incredible. That mix I made for that radio station literally yesterday. I put a bunch of her sound effects from The Innocents in it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I missed it a year ago or whatever, but I just watched The Lodge the other day, and I really liked that movie. I thought that movie was really, really smart. And and I watched
Mommy Guys.
Sorry?
Was that the Goodnight Mommy Guys?
I don't.
Was that one?
What else they made? It's got Alicia Silverstone in it. Briefly. It's kind of incredible. It was a very good movie, I thought. Just like last night or the night before, I rewatched Tales from the Hood, which I hadn't seen in a million years, and I'd kind of forgotten everything except the little intercalary bookend plot. That movie is incredible too. That movie is so much better than my memory gave it credit for, or I feel like I've ever heard anyone give it credit for. It's so smart, and it's so good, and it's so relevant, and it's so fun. Yeah. Those are my two recently.
Okay. David, you want to throw out a title?
Oh man, I don't know. Mine are all going to be boring. I'm about to watch The Shining again tomorrow.
Do it. A classic's a classic.
That movie's still scary to me. It's
scary. Dude, have you seen The Lodge?
I haven't seen The Lodge. But you're the second person this week to talk to me about that.
It is the thing that feels the most like The Shining that I've seen in a long time. There you go, Bill.
There you go.
I totally forgot I was going to do that earlier.
And with that, thank you guys for coming on. Would you like to lead us out? Would you like to review this interview? Would you like to give it a final rating?
I think it went well.
Is that
a light 6?
Light,
I don't know,
okay.
how do we do?
That's pretty generous, I would say.
Is that the Zoom background equivalent of playing Closing Time?
Maybe.
We're getting off this fucking call.
Well, you guys are great. Thank you for the record. Thank you for coming through. Thank you for the conversation. We love you. Chat loves you. You've been fantastic. And have a good night.
Thanks, bro.
You too. Thank you, Anthony.
All right.
Really
bye.